Hi everyone, welcome to our next fireside chat. And next up I am talking to Alex Phillips. He's the Senior Vice President and FinTech Leader, FinPro at Marsh. Now we're going to be talking about where things can go wrong, but it isn't going to be negative in any way. We're going to make this a positive conversation. Understanding litigation against fintechs. So I think an absolutely vital and essential session for us to be having here today. So first of all, Alex, thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you, Scott.
And can you tell us what are the most common risks that fintech companies are facing today in your experience?
Yeah, so again, thank you very much for having me, and it's great to be here to speak. And just before we start, to say again, this is meant to be a positive thing. We're taking ways of protecting the business. I do believe that fintech is really a great innovator, and being someone who's worked in insurance for 20 years, we could certainly do with a lot of shake-up and innovation in our space. So when we talk to clients most about their key risks, they usually come up in a number of sort of sectors. So from the FCA, we look at operational resilience a lot, but that's looking at kind of like your relationship with the outsourced service providers, how you choose them, what the reliance is on those kind of companies. The other one, counterparty risk. Inside and the solvency or insolvency of those parties, and what would happen if one of those were to become insolvent. Obviously, this all leads then to reputational risk, which is a really key thing and untangible in some ways to quantify, except for that is ultimately your biggest risk that you face and something that you're trying to take to market. We obviously see cybersecurity for all companies, and we might be coming on to talk about this, even though it's a fireside chat. And we look as, well, Anton's just mentioned it as well, but just in fraud risk as well. We definitely see huge issues around that. And then because of the tech angle of fintech, we see that intellectual property space is a key area of risk. So how you're going to protect your own intellectual property from being infringed by others.
Okay, that's a great overview there of some of the common risks, and we're going to delve into those a little bit deeper now. You mentioned cybersecurity, for instance. Yeah. How does that play a role in the overall risk landscape for fintech? How significant is cybersecurity?
So every single company we'll talk to, regardless of whether it's fintech or whatever they do, everyone talks about cybersecurity. And I do actually think in this space, fintech has a massive advantage, and there's two big things I'd say. Is that if you look at fintech board composition, there's a much bigger weighting towards people with tech backgrounds. Like, for example, for banks, it's taken them 20 years ago to have someone with a tech background sitting on the board who actually understood the systems would have been like completely crazy to them. They'd have a reporting line into finance, and you're just looking at things at cost. So the idea of board awareness around technology is streets ahead. The other thing you don't have is the legacy systems and having to try and use sticking plasters to try and hold that all together, which the big banks, for example, definitely do have an issue. So fintechs, I think, are a step ahead in that. But that all being said, there's still the classics of the threat of ransomware, which never seems to go away, and talking earlier, as Anton did, about AI and the idea of people being able to impersonate people and fraud, the idea of being able to click on certain links and things like that and create ransomware into your system is much higher. And also the holding of personal information, so the privacy breach aspects of it. Always, again, we talk about the operational resilience, so if the whole systems did go down and you couldn't transact any business, that's going to be clearly like a major issue. The other one that I think people are starting to think about, and the Australian regulator, ASIC, has made a statement about this, is about the actual personal liability you would hold as a director for cybersecurity. It's difficult at the moment to really prove it, whether you had actually been negligent or not. There are quite high-profile cases in the UK of banks doing migrations and causing unknown sort of customer issues with that. But whether the regulator's being able to make someone personally liable for that problem is yet to be seen, but I can see that being an issue in the future.
Yeah, absolutely. And let's talk about regulations. You talked about some changing regulations there in Australia, for instance. Talk us through some of the key regulatory challenges that fintech companies need to be aware of, and obviously aside from the Australia example that you just gave.
Yeah, okay. So, I mean, obviously we could do a whole session. I could be here for an hour talking about regulation, but I've just tried to write down sort of 4 areas that we're looking at. And it's really a couple of things, is that it's the rise of, obviously, the regulators wanting to look at shadow banking institutions, but also trying to protect, ultimately, the consumer. So one that's coming in, obviously, around the buy now, pay later regulations, so trying to look more for a responsibility for the buy now, pay later provider to be able to look at the financial ability of that person to pay that loan back. Is on the front cover of the FT only this morning. It covers the US regulator, CFPB, which is the consumer regulator. There is now starting to want to regulate Apple and other wallet and big tech and payment providers like they would a bank, and bring those rights in there, which is, again, a little bit like GDPR, a way of regulators trying to muscle in on big tech and have them sort of look at regulation as well. Again, now there was a session on crypto before, earlier upstairs, but the MiCA regulation in the EU, and also in the UK, the Financial Services and Market Act, looking at the promotion use of crypto. So following sort of promotion of finance using financial promotion, so actually make that properly regulated, which I think is a good thing. And finally, in 24, we're going to be looking at PSD3. And the issue with PSD3 that we get the most questions about is around the new way they're looking to protect consumers from fraud. So either there's going to be a responsibility on not just the bank or the company sending the money, but also the company receiving the money, and what checks and making sure that that doesn't get lost to fraud that they have to do, and what's going to happen if they breach those rules is a big thing we talk about.
And what changes would you like to see to the regulatory landscape?
I think that I think for fintechs it's very difficult sometimes dealing with the regulator, because if you look at, again, the very big financial institutions are all given a proper caseworker by, say, like the FCA, and they have someone who will come in every single month and they can actually build some sort of relationship with. And when you're not a sort of systemically important institution, if you've got queries, you're having to just phone up to call centres or try and work out how the regulations apply to you, or you're changing the person that you're dealing with quite a lot. And I think that one of the things that would be nice to see is the regulators and fintech sort of being able to kind of collaborate a little bit more. But all that being said, I think the UK especially has done a great job of trying to create regulatory sandboxes and advantages for fintech. And in the UK, we are the second biggest fintech market in the world, I think partly as a result of that. But I think we need to look more at harmonisation of the regulation, and also look at proportionate regulation as well would be really useful.
Now, we've got obviously some significant fintechs here in the room. For any of those that are considering listing publicly, what considerations do they need to take on board?
Okay, so probably as an insurance broker, probably the best day or the most satisfying day is helping that client going on to list and get to a successful IPO. And earlier this year, we worked with one client, and being able to see them ring the bell on the New York Stock Exchange is a great sort of moment to do. And we love doing that with people, but there are a lot of risks involved in it. So to give you just a stat, if you list on the New York Stock Exchange, just as general, there's a stat that basically within 3 years, 30% of those companies listed have had some form of sort of litigation against them, a class action. And looking at, say, the fintechs that have launched recently, a lot of them within a year or two have also suffered some sort of litigation. So it's how would you sort of protect that, and what are they looking at? So the things are, obviously you're looking at the market space that you're trying to list in, which right now I think we would all say is probably not optimum, but I think we all in this room would like to see it become more buoyant and be positive about that. But there's issues around, again, back to the actual rights you have over your software, whether you have patents on that, how you account for customers and numbers of customers. There's some high-profile cases about accounts and how you're actually looking at recognizing revenues in certain areas, which investors obviously are taking big sort of stakes in companies off the back of that. And I think that there's obviously these things that you do need to be aware of, but also make sure that you have the right protections in place, because once you do list, it is a brilliant opportunity and we can help you have the right protections in place to deal with that, because it can be quite a stressful environment.
Now, I'm not going to ask you to name names here, because that would be probably litigation in its own right as well. Yeah. Can you share any examples of where things have gone wrong with fintechs and what lessons can be learned from those, from an insurance point of view?
Yeah, so I'll just take a bit of a step back. So when we deal with financial institutions, we record all the claims that come through. So for the past 3 years, just to give you some stats here, I wrote before we left, we've had 1,500 claims in the past 3 years, okay? So there's basically, and those average out at essentially 500 per year, okay? And out of those claims, 50% will be from the kind of civil liability, so the professional service you're providing to your customers. So the customer's the most likely person to sue you. They will be, and the majority will be, the bank missold, the insurance company didn't pay my claim correctly, the asset manager breached its mandate. The 20% of the claims we get are actually, might surprise you, as regulatory in nature. So the actual regulator being able to get involved, they might be working on behalf of a group of customers that have been there, or making individual allegations or starting investigations against the company. 10% are in another, so we won't cover that. 10% are criminal cases, which will mainly be employee dishonesty of actually stealing funds from the business. And 10%, just to reiterate the last conversation we have, are class actions. So we have, on average, 50 class actions on our books every single year that we deal with. Now, with fintechs, what I've seen is probably the weighting changes slightly because not as many are listed, so you won't have as many class actions right now. But the one that's definitely, there's two things I'd really point out. One is the fraud risk does seem to be much more prevalent. And it's back to a little bit of what Anton was saying on AI. The idea of people being able to sort of impersonate people using, we've seen already, deepfake technology to overcome KYC systems that people have for opening bank accounts, for example, is definitely something that's starting to happen. Like the criminals are becoming a lot more sophisticated than they have been. The other thing that we're definitely seeing is the speed. So we've had companies lose $30 million in 4 hours through just people making fraudulent transactions because they can find the smallest gap and exploit that just in a very organized and sort of methodical way. And so the feedback loop of people being able to detect the problems is very good, but the amount that people can start stealing is quite incredible. And I think that kind of speed of collapse is the other thing I'd really bring to light, because if you look at what's happened to sort of Silicon Valley Bank earlier this year, or you even look at sort of FTX or things like that, those companies went down in like matter of days or weeks, whereas, even when you think about 2008 with Northern Rock, there was days of people being able to queue around the bank, and it was on the front cover of the news for several weeks. SVB went down in basically a weekend. So the speed of information, and also something that we start talking a lot about is potential disinformation that people can spread can have a very material consequence on institutions. So it's something to really be aware of.
Okay, well, we've talked a lot about risks here. Yeah. If you had to highlight one area or one takeaway from this session that anyone involved in fintech, what's the one thing they should be addressing right now, today?
I think that it's just being able to come to events like this and learn more about the changes in the regulation and share the sort of stories that people have had, because sitting on one of the, I think it was a panel on partnerships we were doing earlier, is that it's very easy to sit there and say like everything goes brilliantly and it's all really, really good. But sometimes it's good to sort of share stories of when it didn't go so well. And that's where you are looking for people who can help you sort of explain where like, let's sit down, what do you think your biggest risks are? What can we do to support them? Because there's risks in everything and it's just a case of managing them. And I really do wish everyone really well with that and want to support them through that.
Okay, thank you. Thank you so much, Alex. Thank you. Thank you, Alex.